My neighbor built over my sewer line. Now his basement's underwater. You think you know your neighbors until one decides to build right over your sewer line and then has the nerve to demand you fix their flooded basement. Meet Karen Thompson, HOA board president and the kind of person who measures grass height with a ruler. She thought she could intimidate me into paying for her contractor's mistake. What she didn't know was that I'd been waiting 20 years for this exact moment. Sometimes revenge really is a dish best served ... underwater. My name's Mike, and I've lived at 247 Cedar Lane for nearly 2 decades. It's a modest 3-bedroom house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those cookie-cutter suburban developments where everyone's lawn looks exactly the same. I bought this place fresh out of college in 2004. Back when the neighborhood was still being built and you could actually afford a house on a teacher's salary. The property came with something special, a large corner lot with mature oak trees and, more importantly, the main sewer easement running right along my back fence line. The city records showed it clear as day, a 20-foot easement that gave me certain rights and responsibilities. I maintained that line for years, never thinking much about it until my neighbor decided to get creative with her construction plans. Karen Thompson moved in next door in 2015 with her husband Brad and immediately started making waves in our peaceful community. She joined the HOA board within 6 months and became president within a year. Karen was the type who'd walk around the neighborhood with a clipboard, measuring people's mailbox heights and counting how many flowers you had in your flower bed. She had this way of smiling while she handed you violation notices, like she was doing you a favor by keeping the neighborhood up to standards. Our houses sat on adjacent lots, but Karen always complained that her backyard felt cramped compared to mine. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how unfair it was that I had a corner lot with extra space. What she never seemed to understand was that my lot came with serious restrictions. That sewer easement meant I couldn't build certain structures or plant deep-rooted trees in specific areas. It was a trade-off I'd accepted when I bought the house, but Karen saw it as some kind of neighborhood injustice. For years, we coexisted peacefully enough. I kept to myself, maintained my property according to HOA standards, and avoided drama whenever possible. Karen would occasionally leave passive-aggressive notes about my trash cans being out too early or my grass being a 1/4 inch too long, but nothing too serious. Just typical HOA president power trips that I'd learned too. Ignore that all changed in spring of 2023 when Karen announced her grand plan to expand her basement and build a luxury home addition. She hired contractors, pulled permits with the city, and started construction without ever bothering to check where exactly that municipal sewer line ran through our adjoining properties. I watched from my kitchen window as they dug deeper and deeper into her backyard, getting closer to my property line each day. The smart thing would have been to warn her. Any reasonable neighbor would have knocked on her door and mentioned that she was digging awfully close to a major utility easement. But after years of Karen's nitpicking every little detail about my property maintenance, after countless violation notices for imaginary infractions, after watching her bully other neighbors into submission with her clipboard and ruler, I decided to let Karen learn about property boundaries the hard way. Some lessons come with a very expensive price tag. Karen was about to get an education in municipal infrastructure that would cost her more than she ever imagined. And frankly, after years of her harassment, I was looking forward to watching every single dollar disappear into that muddy hole she was digging in her backyard. But I had no idea just how spectacular this disaster was going to become. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in June. Exactly 3 weeks after Karen's contractors hit something underground that made them all start talking very quickly in Spanish. I was drinking coffee on my back porch, enjoying the peaceful morning, when Karen marched across the yard clutching an official-looking document in her perfectly manicured hands. She was wearing her usual HOA president uniform, pressed khaki pants, a crisp polo shirt with the Willowbrook Estates logo, and that particular smug expression she saved for delivering neighborhood violations. "Mike," she said, not bothering with pleasantries or even a good morning greeting, "we need to discuss your sewer maintenance responsibilities immediately." She thrust the paper at me like it was a court summons, her French manicured nails tapping impatiently against the clipboard. At the top, in bold red letters, it read Homeowner Association. Violation notice. Immediate action required. Below, that was a long list of complaints about my failure to properly maintain common utility infrastructure and allowing vegetation overgrowth that impacts neighboring properties and creates drainage hazards. "What exactly are you talking about, Karen?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea where this conversation was heading. "Your sewer line," she said, pointing dramatically toward the back of my property with her perfectly coordinated pen. "It's creating serious drainage issues for my construction project. My contractor says the old pipes are probably cracked and deteriorating, and they need immediate replacement before they cause more damage to surrounding properties." I read through the violation notice more carefully, marveling at Karen's creative interpretation of HOA regulations. She had somehow twisted the neighborhood covenants to make it sound like I was personally responsible for upgrading the entire municipal sewer system that served 12 houses on our block. The notice demanded that I hire a licensed contractor within 30 days to modernize the infrastructure to current building standards and prevent further water damage to adjacent properties, which would cost me at least $15,000, possibly more. "Karen, this is a city sewer line that's been here since 2002, I explained as calmly as I could manage. "I maintain the easement area by keeping it clear of debris and major vegetation, but I'm not responsible for replacing municipal infrastructure that's been functioning perfectly for over 20 years. "That's not what our legal counsel says," she replied smugly, pulling out another document from her ever-present folder of neighborhood complaints. "According to this official interpretation of the covenants, property owners with utility easements bear full responsibility for any infrastructure improvements needed to support ongoing neighborhood development and construction projects." I looked at the letterhead, Webb and Associates, some law firm I'd never heard of in my 20 years of living here. The legal opinion was 3 pages of dense, confusing text that basically said whatever Karen wanted it to say. She'd clearly shopped around until she found a lawyer willing to write up her fantasy interpretation of property law and HOA regulations. "You have exactly 30 days to comply with this violation notice," Karen continued in her most official HOA president voice, "or will be forced to impose daily fines of $200 until the issue is completely resolved." The HOA board voted unanimously at last week's emergency meeting to take immediate action on this matter. Last week's emergency meeting that I wasn't notified about, I asked, starting to feel my teacher patience wearing thin. Karen's smile got even more condescending. "Emergency meetings only require 48 hours notice to board members. Mike, regular homeowners are notified after decisions are made, not before. It's all clearly outlined in the HOA bylaws that you signed when you purchased your property." She turned to leave with a dramatic flourish, then paused for maximum effect. "Oh, and Mike, my contractor accidentally hit some kind of pipe yesterday during the excavation work. There's been some minor water damage to my beautiful new basement addition. I'm sure you'll want to address that situation quickly before it becomes a much bigger problem for both of our properties." As Karen walked away, her heels clicking on my driveway like a countdown timer, I realized this wasn't really about sewer maintenance at all. Karen had made a very costly mistake during her construction project, and now she was desperately trying to make it my financial responsibility. Her contractor had obviously damaged the municipal sewer line, and instead of reporting it to the city like they were legally required to do, they tried to cover it up with some temporary fixes that were already failing. What Karen didn't know was that I'd been documenting every single inch of that sewer line for nearly 20 years. I had maintenance records, city inspection reports, and photographs that would make her very expensive lawyers look like complete amateurs when this inevitably ended up in court. But that was just the beginning of Karen's harassment campaign. Karen wasn't content to wait 30 days for my response to her ridiculous demands. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched what I can only describe as a full-scale neighborhood harassment campaign specifically designed to force me into submission and make me pay for her contractors. Massive screw-up. It started with the daily inspections that felt more like military surveillance. Every single morning at exactly 7 a.m., Karen would appear in my backyard with her clipboard, camera, and measuring tape documenting evidence of my supposed sewer line negligence. She'd take dozens of photos of perfectly normal tree roots, measure the height of grass near the easement with a ruler, and leave bright yellow sticky notes on my back fence pointing out violations that existed only in her imagination. Then came the avalanche of additional violation notices that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Karen had apparently discovered that she could issue HOA fines for virtually anything if she worded the complaints creatively enough. I received official citations for improper easement landscaping because I had hostas planted within 15 feet of the sewer line. Another fine arrived for failure to maintain adequate drainage markers. Apparently, I was supposed to have bright orange utility flags marking every 10 feet of the sewer route like some kind of construction zone. The fines started adding up with terrifying speed. $200 for the original sewer violation, plus $50 daily for each new infraction Karen managed to invent. Within 10 days, she had manufactured over $800 in penalties, with more accumulating every 24 hours like interest on a predatory loan. But the real pressure came from the legal threats that arrived in my mailbox like clockwork. Karen's lawyer, some guy named Marcus Webb from Webb and Associates, started sending increasingly aggressive letters to my house. The first one politely requested that I cure the violation promptly to avoid further legal action and additional penalties. The second one threatened to place a lien on my property if I continued to ignore my legal obligations to the homeowner association. The third one mentioned the possibility of seeking substantial damages for water intrusion and property damage caused by negligent infrastructure maintenance. That's when I decided to take a closer look at exactly what Karen's construction project had done to the municipal sewer system. What I found was so much worse than I'd imagined, and it explained why Karen was getting increasingly desperate to make this my problem. Her contractors hadn't just accidentally hit the sewer line during excavation. They had completely demolished a 20-foot section of the main pipe while digging the foundation. For her basement expansion, the original clay pipes were shattered into pieces, and they'd tried to rear out the sewage flow using temporary PVC connections that were already failing under the pressure. It was like trying to fix a broken dam with duct tape and prayers. Karen's minor water damage was actually a growing environmental disaster. Her brand new basement had standing water in 3 different rooms, and I could see dark water stains creeping up the foundation walls like some kind of toxic tide. The contractor had essentially built her dream addition directly on top of a broken sewer line, and now gravity was doing exactly what gravity always does, flowing downhill into the lowest point, which happened to be Karen's expensive new basement. The harassment campaign intensified dramatically when Karen realized I wasn't going to cave to her demands and threats. She started showing up at my workplace, the local elementary school where I taught 5th grade mathematics, to discuss the situation privately in the parking lot after school. She'd wait by my car with new legal documents and increasingly desperate settlement offers, trying to negotiate some kind of deal that would save her from financial ruin. "Mike, let's be reasonable here," she said during one particularly uncomfortable encounter that made me feel like I was being stalked. My contractor estimates the proper repair will cost around $12,000. I'm willing to split that cost with you 50-50, which is more than fair considering it's technically your responsibility under the easement agreement. When I refused her generous offer to pay for half of her contractor's illegal work, Karen escalated her campaign to involve the entire neighborhood. She organized what she called emergency community meetings in her living room, where she'd present her carefully crafted version of the story to anyone willing to listen and eat her store-bought cookies. According to Karen's narrative, I was a selfish, stubborn neighbor who refused to maintain basic infrastructure, putting everyone's property values and safety at serious risk. Some neighbors bought her story completely. Others started avoiding me entirely, not wanting to get caught up in what looked like expensive HOA drama. A few brave souls approached me privately to say they thought Karen was completely out of line, but none of them were willing to speak up publicly against the HOA president who controlled their violation notices and fine schedules. The final straw came when Karen announced she was hiring a second contractor to perform emergency repairs on the sewer, line, and billing all costs directly to my property through the HOA's legal authority. She claimed that the homeowner association had the power to perform necessary infrastructure maintenance and recover all costs through property liens and collections proceedings. This situation has gone on far too long, she declared in an email blast to every single homeowner in Willowbrook Estates. Some people think they can ignore their legal responsibilities and let their negligence damage other people's expensive property investments. The HOA board will absolutely not stand for this kind of selfish, irresponsible behavior that threatens our entire community. As I sat in my kitchen reading her accusatory email, listening to the constant sound of industrial water pumps running 24 hours a day in Karen's flooded basement next door, I realized it was finally time to stop playing defense against her lies and harassment. I'd spent weeks carefully documenting every single illegal thing Karen and her contractors had done, and I'd been quietly making some very important phone calls to people who had the actual authority to deal with this mess. Karen thought she held all the cards in this neighborhood poker game. What she didn't realize was that I'd been sitting on a royal flush for 20 years, just waiting for someone foolish enough to call my bluff and force me to show my hand. That evening, I pulled out a thick file folder I hadn't touched in years, my original property purchase documents from 2004. Inside that folder was something Karen's expensive lawyers had apparently missed during all their creative interpretation of HOA regulations. The original utility easement agreement between Willowbrook Estates and the City Municipal Authority. Most people don't bother reading the fine print when they buy their first house. They trust their real estate agent, sign whatever papers the lawyer puts in front of them, and hope for the best. But I was young and paranoid back then, fresh out of college with a head full of worst-case scenarios. So I'd studied every single page of every single document like I was preparing for the most important test of my life, hidden away in Section 12 of the utility easement agreement was a clause that would change absolutely everything in this battle with Karen. Property owners shall maintain exclusive authority over easement access and modifications. Any construction, excavation, or structural improvements within 50 feet of established easement boundaries requires written approval from easement holder prior to commencement of work. Karen's contractors hadn't just damaged my sewer line, they had violated a legally binding municipal agreement by building within the restricted zone without my written permission. Every single day that her basement addition remained standing was technically an act of trespass on my easement rights. And according to the fine print that Karen's lawyers had missed, I had the legal authority to demand immediate removal of any unauthorized structures. But that wasn't even the best part of my hidden ace. I made a phone call to my old friend Janet Morrison, who worked in the city planning and permits department. We'd stayed in touch over the years since college, and I'd helped her daughter Emma with advanced mathematics tutoring during a particularly rough patch in middle school. Janet owed me a significant favor, and I was finally ready to collect on that debt. Mike Henderson, she said when she recognized my voice. How's the teaching life treating you? Wait, aren't you supposed to be thinking about retirement soon? Still got a few years left in me, but I might have some unexpected free time coming up. I said carefully, listen, Janet, I need you to look up some construction permits for me. My neighbor built a basement addition, and I think there might be some serious issues with the city approvals. Sure, no problem. What's the address? 20 minutes later, Janet called me back with information that made my entire week and probably my entire year. Mike, your neighbor never filed for an easement modification permit with our office. In fact, according to our records, she specifically told our planning department that her construction project was more than 50 feet away from any utility easements. She signed a sworn affidavit stating that was absolutely true. So Karen had committed perjury by lying to the city planning department about the location of her construction project. That made her basement addition not just a civil trespass issue, but actual permit fraud that could involve criminal charges. There's even more bad news for your neighbor, Janet continued, and I could hear her flipping through pages of official records. The contractor never called for mandatory utility location services before they started digging. That's a state law violation that carries automatic fines and penalties. Plus, they never reported hitting the sewer line to our emergency services department, which is required within 24 hours of any utility damage according to municipal code. I hung up the phone and smiled for the first time in weeks. Karen had spent the last month threatening me with legal action and financial ruin, not realizing that she had committed at least 3 separate violations of city and state law in her rush to build her dream basement. Her contractor had committed several additional violations that could result in license suspension and heavy fines, but I wasn't finished digging into Karen's legal problems yet. The next morning, I made another very important phone call, this one to the State Environmental Protection Agency. It turns out that illegally damaging municipal sewer infrastructure and allowing untreated wastewater to contaminate local groundwater supplies is exactly the kind of environmental violation that gets government agencies very interested very quickly in pursuing serious legal action. Karen thought she'd been playing chess with me, using her HOA authority and legal threats to force me into submission. What she didn't realize was that I'd actually been playing poker this entire time, and I was finally ready to lay down my cards and show her exactly what a losing hand looked like. The game was about to change completely, and Karen was going to discover that some mistakes cost a lot more than $15,000. Monday morning, I made the phone call that would change everything in this neighborhood battle. City Planning Department. This is Janet Morrison speaking. Hey Janet, it's Mike. I've made my decision about filing that formal complaint against my neighbor's unpermitted construction project. Are you absolutely sure you want to go that route? Once I submit this paperwork, it's going to get pretty serious pretty quickly. There's no taking it back. Karen Thompson has been threatening to destroy my credit, lien my house, and bankrupt me over her own construction mistakes for the past month. I think serious consequences are exactly what this situation calls for right now. Within 3 hours of that phone call, Karen received her first official visitor, City Code Enforcement Officer Dave Martinez, who arrived at her house with a clipboard, a digital camera, and the full legal authority to shut down illegal construction projects immediately. I watched the entire encounter from my kitchen window while pretending to wash dishes. Dave spent 45 minutes systematically examining Karen's basement addition, taking detailed measurements, photographing every angle of the construction, and asking increasingly pointed questions about permits and approvals. Karen kept gesturing frantically toward my property, clearly trying to explain how this whole mess was somehow my fault and my responsibility. Dave wasn't buying a single word of her desperate explanations. By Tuesday morning, there was a bright red stop work order notice posted prominently on Karen's construction site. Her contractors weren't legally allowed to touch anything until all the permit violations were completely resolved through proper channels. More importantly, the city was now requiring Karen to prove that her foundation work wouldn't cause any additional damage to the municipal sewer system before any construction could continue. That's when things started getting really expensive for Karen. The city demanded an immediate professional engineering assessment of all the sewer line damage, which cost Karen $3,000 just for the initial inspection and evaluation. The engineer's report was absolutely devastating to Karen's legal position. Her construction project had caused significant structural damage to critical municipal infrastructure and created ongoing environmental contamination, risks that require immediate professional remediation. Wednesday brought official visitor number 2, Environmental Protection Agency Inspector Sarah Chen, who was extremely interested in Karen's unpermitted discharge of raw sewage into the local groundwater system. Apparently, when you break a major sewer line and don't report it to the proper authorities, the environmental protection folks take that kind of violation very personally. Double quotes Mrs. Thompson. I heard Inspector Chen saying in her official government voice as I happened to be watering my garden nearby, "We're detecting significantly elevated contamination levels in the soil samples around your construction site. This is going to require immediate environmental remediation under state and federal protection statutes." Karen's voice was getting higher and more panicked with each official question. "But it's not my fault that the pipes were old. My neighbor was supposed to maintain that sewer line. This is his responsibility, not mine. Ma'am, according to city planning records, you never applied for the required easement modification permit before beginning your construction project. You also never contacted state utility location services before excavating, which is mandatory under state law. Those are your legal responsibilities as the property owner, regardless of who maintains the actual infrastructure." Thursday brought my personal favorite official visitor, Detective Raymond Torres from the County Criminal Fraud Investigation Unit, apparently lying on sworn city documents about construction distances from utility easements isn't just a civil matter that gets handled with fines. It's actually criminal fraud that can result in felony charges and possible jail time. I didn't get close enough to hear that particular conversation, but I definitely saw Karen's face when Detective Torres finally left her house after 2 hours of questioning. She looked like someone who had just realized they'd brought a plastic knife to a gunfight, with people carrying actual weapons. But the real victory in this neighborhood war came Friday afternoon. Karen knocked on my front door for the first time in months, and she wasn't carrying her usual clipboard or stack of violation notices. She looked completely exhausted, utterly defeated, and very, very expensive. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her HOA president polo shirt was wrinkled, and her hands were actually shaking. "Mike," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I think we really need to talk about resolving this situation." "I'm listening." "Karen, what exactly do you want to discuss?" "The city planning department is requiring me to completely remove my entire basement addition. They're saying it was built in direct violation of easement restrictions and environmental protection regulations. The EPA inspector wants me to excavate and professionally replace 40 feet of damaged sewer line at my own expense. My insurance company won't cover any of it because I didn't obtain the proper construction permits." I nodded sympathetically while trying not to smile. "That does sound quite expensive. It's going to cost me over $60,000 to fix everything properly. Plus, Detective Torres is talking about filing criminal fraud charges related to the permit applications." Karen's voice cracked slightly with the stress. My lawyer says I absolutely need to make this situation right with you first, or those criminal charges are definitely going forward to the prosecutor's office. What exactly are you proposing, Karen? I'll immediately drop all the HOA violations and fines against you. I'll pay for all the proper sewer line repairs using licensed contractors with full city permits and inspections. And I'll resign from my position on the HOA board, effective immediately. I pretended to seriously consider this incredibly generous offer for Karen to stop doing illegal things to me and fix all the damage she had caused to public infrastructure with her own money. There's one more thing I'm going to need. Karen, what's that? You're going to send an email to every single homeowner in Willowbrook Estates explaining that you made completely false accusations against me, that I had absolutely no responsibility for your construction problems, and that you're sincerely sorry for the harassment campaign you've been running against me for the past month. Karen's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. Fine, I'll send the email, and Karen, next time you want to build something on your property, maybe spend the extra $50 to find out where the sewer line actually runs before you start digging, as Karen walked slowly back to her house, or what was left of it after. The city and state agencies were finished with their investigations. I realized that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't something you carefully plan and execute. Sometimes it's simply stepping back and letting someone's own arrogance, lies, and poor decisions catch up with them in spectacular fashion. Karen had spent weeks trying to force me to pay for her expensive mistakes. In the end, justice was going to cost her absolutely everything, and it was all completely her own fault. The next few weeks turned into the most entertaining reality show our quiet suburban neighborhood had ever witnessed. It was like watching a very expensive train wreck happen in slow motion, except the train was made of Karen's dreams and the wreck was costing her thousands of dollars. Every single day, Karen's Grand Basement Edition project became the neighborhood's most popular daily entertainment. Every morning brought new contractors, government inspectors, and official personnel carrying clipboards and wearing serious expressions. The bright red stop work order signs multiplied across her property like wildflowers after rain, and soon Karen's entire backyard looked like a construction zone that had been quarantined by the Centers for Disease Control. The first major spectacle came when the environmental remediation team arrived in full hazmat suits to excavate all the contaminated soil around Karen's foundation. They looked like they were cleaning up after a nuclear accident rather than dealing with a basement renovation gone wrong. Apparently, 3 weeks of untreated raw sewage seeping into the local groundwater had created what Inspector Chen officially classified as a significant biohazard situation, requiring immediate professional intervention. Neighbors who had been avoiding me during Karen's harassment campaign started gathering on their front porches every morning with coffee and pastries, watching the daily parade of expensive disasters unfold at the Thompson house. The same people who had crossed the street to avoid getting involved in HOA drama were suddenly very interested in hearing my side of this increasingly expensive story. Mike, said Mrs. Patterson from directly across the street, approaching me while I collected my morning newspaper. Karen told everyone at her community meetings that you were refusing to fix the sewer line out of pure spite. She made it sound like you were being completely unreasonable about a simple maintenance issue. Did Karen happen to mention that her contractor destroyed 20 feet of city infrastructure without bothering to call for mandatory utility location services? I asked politely. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with surprise. She told us it was just an unfortunate accident that could have happened to anyone during normal construction work. Mrs. Patterson, accidents happen when you follow all the proper legal procedures and something unexpected goes wrong anyway. This was criminal negligence and environmental contamination. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church social about what had actually happened behind all of Karen's official complaints and legal threats. Her carefully constructed narrative about the selfish, irresponsible neighbor completely collapsed as people learned the real truth about permit fraud, environmental violations, and her desperate attempt to stick me with the financial responsibility for her contractor's multiple illegal actions. The HOA drama reached peak entertainment value when Karen's resignation letter arrived in everyone's mailbox on the same day that demolition crews started tearing apart her dream basement. It was an absolute masterpiece of reluctant accountability and carefully worded non-apologies. Asterisk due to recent misunderstandings regarding property maintenance responsibilities and construction permit requirements, I have decided to step down from my position as HOA president, effective immediately. I want to clarify for the entire community that Mike Henderson bears absolutely no responsibility for recent infrastructure issues in our neighborhood. Any previous communications suggesting otherwise were based on incomplete information and incorrect legal advice. I sincerely apologize for any confusion or inconvenience this situation may have caused to our homeowners. Asterisk, even in her official resignation letter, Karen couldn't bring herself to fully admit that she had been completely wrong about everything. Misunderstandings and incomplete information, as if committing perjury on city planning documents was just a simple miscommunication? That could happen to anyone. The criminal fraud charges never actually materialized. But Detective Torres made absolutely sure that Karen understood exactly how close she had come to facing felony prosecution. The district attorney's office agreed to drop their investigation in exchange for Karen's full cooperation with all city and state officials, plus payment of every single dollar in environmental remediation costs. Karen's homeowner's insurance company wasn't nearly as forgiving as the criminal justice system. They completely denied coverage for the entire expensive mess, citing intentional misrepresentation of material facts on her original permit applications. All $60,000 in demolition, excavation, sewer repairs, and environmental cleanup costs came directly out of Karen and Brad's personal savings accounts. The demolition of Karen's basement addition began on a Tuesday morning in August. I have to admit, there was a certain poetic justice in watching her expensive dream addition get systematically torn apart piece by the same construction crew that had originally built it. They were now being paid premium rates to destroy their own work. All because Karen couldn't be bothered to spend $50 on proper utility location services before breaking ground on her project. By September, Karen's backyard was nothing but a muddy hole surrounded by orange safety fencing and environmental monitoring equipment. The new municipal sewer line was installed properly this time, with all the correct permits, city inspections, and professional certifications. The environmental cleanup process took another full month, but eventually the hazmat teams declared the contaminated soil officially safe for human habitation again. Karen and Brad quietly put their house up for sale in October. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that they were moving to a small townhouse across town, somewhere with no HOA regulations and definitely no utility easements to worrying about navigating. The new neighbors who eventually bought the Thompson house seem absolutely lovely. They introduced themselves the day they moved in, brought me homemade cookies as a welcoming gift, and specifically asked detailed questions about any utility easements or construction restrictions before they even started planning their modest garden improvements. It's truly amazing how much more peaceful and friendly our entire neighborhood became once Karen's reign of clipboard terror finally ended. No more daily violation inspections, no more threatening letters about grass being a quarter-inch tall, and definitely no more emergency HOA meetings designed to shake down law-abiding homeowners for imaginary infractions. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge really is just stepping back and letting people face the completely natural consequences of their own dishonest actions and terrible decisions. Looking back on this entire expensive mess, I learned some incredibly valuable lessons about dealing with HOA tyrants, power-hungry neighbors, and people who think they can bully their way out of costly mistakes by threatening lawsuits and financial ruin. First and most importantly, documentation is absolutely everything when you're dealing with property disputes. Those 20 years worth of maintenance records, original easement agreements, city inspection reports, and detailed photographs saved me from paying tens of thousands of dollars for someone else's expensive construction mistakes. Keep every single document related to your property ownership. You never know when you'll need to prove your legal rights against someone who's trying to make their problems your financial responsibility. Second, never let neighborhood bullies intimidate you with fake legal threats and made-up interpretations of HOA regulations. Karen's expensive lawyer wrote very impressive-sounding demand letters, but all that legal creativity couldn't change the basic facts about who was actually responsible for what under city and state law when someone starts threatening property liens and credit destruction. That's usually the exact moment when you know they don't have a legitimate legal case and they're just hoping to scare you into paying for their mistakes. Third, and most importantly for anyone dealing with similar HOA drama, sometimes the very best strategy is simply stepping back and letting people dig their own expensive holes, quite literally. In Karen's particular case, Karen spent over $60,000 learning that you can't lie to city planning departments, ignore state environmental protection laws, or try to make your neighbors pay for your contractor's illegal work. She lost her HOA presidency, her dream basement, her insurance coverage, and eventually her entire house because she thought she could intimidate a fifth-grade math teacher into paying for her construction disasters. The funniest part is that if Karen had simply knocked on my door before starting construction and asked about the sewer line location, I would have happily shown her exactly where it ran and probably even helped her design around it. Instead, she chose harassment, threats, and legal warfare, and it cost her everything she'd worked years to build. Have you ever dealt with an HOA board member who thought the neighborhood rules didn't apply to their own construction projects? Or maybe a power-hungry neighbor who tried to make their expensive mistakes your financial responsibility through intimidation and fake legal threats? Drop your story in the comments section below. I'd absolutely love to hear how you handled your own neighborhood drama and whether you managed to get the justice you deserved. Next week, we're diving deep into another tale of spectacular HOA revenge that involves garden gnomes, spite fences, and a homeowner who discovered that two can definitely play the petty enforcement game. They fined me for my garden gnomes, so I built a spite fence they'll never forget. Trust me, you absolutely won't want to miss that incredibly satisfying story of creative neighborhood justice. Until then, remember to keep all your property documents in a safe place, know your legal rights as a homeowner, and never let HOA bullies convince you to pay for problems you didn't create. Sometimes patience and proper documentation are the most powerful weapons you can have in a neighborhood war.